The early morning sun had barely risen above the city's skyline when Sarah Mitchell drove into the nearly empty parking lot of Meridian Technologies. The sleek glass building towered over the other structures in the area, its windows reflecting the soft orange glow of the dawn. She parked her modest Honda Civic far from the entrance, in the corner of the lot, deliberately choosing the space farthest from the executive parking spots. At 42 years old, Sarah had reached a significant milestone in her career, but despite her accomplishments she remained grounded, mindful of her beginnings. Sarah had come a long way from her working-class roots in Detroit. She had spent her childhood watching her parents struggle to make ends meet, and from an early age she understood the value of hard work. To put herself through college, she worked long nights cleaning offices, barely finding time for sleep, and still managed to keep up with her studies during the day. Her relentless work ethic and sharp business acumen earned her an MBA from Harvard, and for the next 15 years she had turned around struggling companies, using her keen sense of leadership to breathe new life into businesses that had been on the brink of collapse. But today, as she sat in her car, staring at the building ahead, Sarah felt a deep sense of humility. The board of directors had chosen her to be the new CEO of Meridian Technologies, but she wasn't officially starting until next week. There was still a sense of distance between the woman in the car and the title she had worked so hard to achieve. This feeling of separation was compounded by the folded cleaning uniform on the passenger seat. As part of a habit she had developed over her career, Sarah wanted to observe the company's inner workings before officially assuming the role of CEO. She had done this in the past with every company she led, spending the first few days at ground level, learning the nuances of workplace culture by observing the daily lives of the employees who worked at the very heart of the business. Her father's words, "The real heart of any company beats on the ground floor," had stuck with her, guiding her throughout her professional journey. She had always believed that the best leaders were those who understood every level of their organization, not just the boardroom. And so, Sarah had arranged to begin her observation undercover. She would spend a few days working as a member of the cleaning staff, blending in with the people who maintained the building and gained first-hand insight into the company's culture. It wasn't glamorous work, but Sarah knew it was necessary. After taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, changed into the gray cleaning uniform, and drove around to the back of the building to the service entrance. The transition from high-powered executive to cleaning staff was swift, yet Sarah knew that this would be the key to understanding the true dynamics of the company. She was ready to begin her work. At 6:30 a.m., Sarah entered the building and found Mrs. Rodriguez, the cleaning supervisor, waiting for her. Mrs. Rodriguez was one of the few people who knew Sarah's true identity, and Sarah had arranged the position through a trusted friend in HR. Mrs. Rodriguez's nervousness was palpable as she handed Sarah a cleaning cart filled with supplies. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell," she whispered, glancing nervously around to ensure no one was listening. Sarah smiled and reassured her. "Please just call me Sarah. Treat me like any other new cleaning staff member," she said, keeping her voice warm and friendly. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded and quickly got to work, showing Sarah the ropes. She instructed her to start on the executive floors from the 15th to the 20th, and explained how to use the cleaning supplies and which keys opened which doors. The early birds, Mrs. Rodriguez explained, would begin arriving around 7:30 a.m., so it was crucial to get a head start on the more visible areas before the employees began flooding in. As Sarah made her way into the elevator with her cleaning cart, she noticed the palpable sense of nervousness in Mrs. Rodriguez. Many executives wouldn't even think of doing what Sarah was doing, working alongside the cleaning staff in an effort to understand the company from the bottom up. To most it would be seen as beneath them. But Sarah knew better. She had always believed that true leadership came from a deep understanding of all levels of an organization. The executives at Meridian Technologies were about to get an insight into their company's culture, but they would never suspect the woman cleaning their offices was soon to be their new CEO. The executive floors were exactly as Sarah had imagined, luxurious and imposing. Expensive artwork adorned the walls, thick carpets covered the floors, and corner offices offered sweeping views of the city. As she moved through the halls, cleaning as she went, Sarah couldn't help but notice the personal touches scattered throughout the offices: family photos framed on desks, coffee cups emblazoned with the company logo, and scattered post-it notes with reminders for upcoming meetings. These small details were the key to understanding the personalities of the people who worked there. Sarah's observations were particularly focused on the names on the office doors: James Peterson, VP of Operations; Michael Chin, CFO; Amanda Torres, Head of Marketing. These names, she knew, would soon be part of her inner circle, and their offices would give her a deeper understanding of who they were, both as leaders and as individuals. As she carefully dusted the awards display in James Peterson's office, she heard voices in the hallway. The first arrivals of the day were starting to filter in. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. How would the executives treat the cleaning staff? Would they notice the woman cleaning the halls? Would they behave with the same respect as they would if they knew she was their future CEO? With a deep breath, Sarah continued her work, determined to observe the truth of the office dynamics, even if it meant remaining invisible. As two well-dressed men passed by Peterson's office without so much as a glance at her, Sarah couldn't help but feel a small smile tug at her lips. This was exactly what she had expected. She was invisible to them, a simple cleaning woman in a gray uniform. She had already learned more about the real culture of the company than she could have in a boardroom meeting. The building was waking up, the elevator doors chimed, and the clack of high heels echoed through the halls. The hum of the company's daily rhythm was beginning, but Sarah Mitchell, despite the Harvard MBA and the impending CEO title, remained unnoticed as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, ready to learn more. At 8:15 a.m., Sarah was cleaning the glass walls of the conference room when James Peterson, the VP of Operations, stormed into the office, his presence instantly commanding attention. The energy on the floor shifted dramatically. Employees straightened their backs, and those who had been sitting idly at their desks now feigned productivity. Sarah kept her head down, not wanting to attract attention, but she couldn't help but watch him from the corner of her eye. Peterson was everything Sarah had imagined, a tall, imposing man in his 50s, wearing a sharp, expensive suit that likely cost more than what most of the cleaning staff made in a month. His shoes were so shiny that she could see her reflection in them as he walked past. He carried a large cup of designer coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, clearly engrossed in some important matter. Then suddenly his voice cut through the quiet morning, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. "Who left these marks on my office door?" he shouted, his eyes immediately scanning the area. He pointed to some fingerprints on the glass door to his office. Sarah felt the familiar sting of indignity as Peterson's words hung in the air. He snapped his fingers at her, treating her like she was nothing more than a servant. "You cleaning lady, come here right now," he barked. Sarah's heart began to race, but she kept her composure. She quietly pushed her cleaning cart toward Peterson's office, her mind racing. She could feel the eyes of the employees on her, the pitying looks, but she refused to let it rattle her. She was here to observe, and this moment would be part of the truth she needed to understand. Peterson continued to berate her in front of his team, his voice dripping with disdain. "Look at this mess," he said loudly. "Do you even know how to clean properly, or is this the best we can expect from someone like you?" The emphasis he placed on "someone like you" hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. It was a stark reminder of the prejudice that often lurked beneath the surface in corporate environments, even in this supposedly modern, progressive company. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly, fighting back the anger that bubbled up inside her. "I'll take care of it right away." But Peterson wasn't done. "You better," he sneered. "When I started at this company 20 years ago, we had people who knew how to do this job properly. Not like you, clearly." The words stung, but Sarah held her ground. She would clean that door. She would do it perfectly. And as she did, she would remember this moment, this cruel, dismissive treatment, as part of the truth she was here to uncover. James Peterson continued to berate Sarah as she worked, his sharp words like daggers aimed directly at her dignity. "Standards for our cleaning staff have really dropped," he said loudly, shaking his head in disapproval. "Now they just hire anyone off the street?" His voice carried through the open offices, forcing Sarah to hold back the anger that welled inside her. As she wiped down the glass door, her hand moved deliberately, every stroke precise, though Peterson didn't seem to notice the quality of her work. All he seemed focused on was belittling her and anyone else he deemed beneath him. Two young executives walked by, their eyes skittering nervously over Sarah, their footsteps quickening as they tried to avoid looking directly at her. Sarah caught the glance of one, a young woman in a blue suit. There was a momentary flicker of sympathy in her eyes, but the woman remained silent, clearly unsure how to respond or perhaps afraid to stand up for Sarah in front of Peterson. Sarah noticed the subtle looks of discomfort from the other employees. They had seen this kind of treatment before, the casual degradation of someone in a lower position, and yet no one dared to speak out against it. Peterson's power was too great. "Do you even understand English?" Peterson asked sarcastically as Sarah remained silent, her head bowed as she worked. "Maybe that's the problem," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe we need to start giving English tests before we hire cleaners. How about that?" He paused as if waiting for a response, but Sarah didn't give him the satisfaction. She simply continued with her task, each swipe of the cloth a small act of resistance. Every so often, Peterson would point out another spot Sarah had supposedly missed, though she knew her work was flawless. His criticisms were never about the quality of the cleaning, only about the fact that someone like her was in his way, someone he believed was beneath him. Sarah kept a mental note of every word he spoke, every subtle hint of racism and classism. Mrs. Rodriguez, the cleaning supervisor, hovered nearby, clearly wanting to intervene but too afraid to risk Peterson's wrath. Her hands were shaking as she pretended to dust a nearby plant, unwilling to challenge the man who held so much power in the company. "Well, don't just stand there all day," Peterson barked at Sarah after another few moments of passive-aggressive comments. "There's actual important work happening here. Go clean somewhere else where you won't be in the way of real business people." He waved his hand dismissively as if Sarah were an insignificant annoyance. Just then Michael Chen, the company's CFO, walked by. He frowned slightly when he saw Peterson's treatment of Sarah but quickly forced a laugh, trying to play along with Peterson's mockery. "Mike, can you believe the quality of help we get these days?" Peterson said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I bet this one doesn't even have a high school diploma. Probably can't even spell window correctly." Chen gave an uncomfortable smile but didn't say anything. He quickly retreated into his office, closing the door softly behind him, as if to shut out the unpleasantness unfolding in the hallway. It was clear that Chen, like most of the executives, knew better than to challenge Peterson directly. As Sarah continued cleaning, she could hear Peterson on the phone again, his voice loud and booming in the otherwise quiet hallway. "Yeah, Bob, you won't believe what I have to deal with here," he was saying, his voice dripping with annoyance. "These cleaning people. I mean, whatever happened to hiring qualified individuals? I tell you, this company is going downhill." Sarah's hand tightened around the handle of her cleaning cart, the anger building inside her, but she remained silent. She couldn't afford to lose her composure, not yet. She had a bigger plan in mind, a deeper purpose for being here. As she pushed her cart into the break room, she took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She checked her watch, 9 a.m., and already in just a few short hours she had gathered more information about the company's culture than she could have ever hoped for in a month of executive meetings. The things she had witnessed, the blatant racism, the disregard for the support staff, were only the tip of the iceberg. Pulling out her phone, Sarah made a quick voice note, speaking softly to herself. Day 1 observations. Immediate action needed regarding workplace discrimination and toxic leadership. Special attention to James Peterson, VP of Operations. Note, complete lack of intervention from other executives. Current company culture allows open harassment of support staff. She paused, taking a breath. The issues at Meridian go far beyond one individual. The entire system needs to be restructured. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, hearing Peterson's loud voice echoing down the hallway as he continued to complain about her. Sarah smiled slightly to herself. In just a few days, Peterson would learn exactly who he had been mocking. But it wasn't revenge that drove Sarah, it was something far more significant. She wasn't here to make him suffer, she was here to change the entire corporate culture of Meridian Technologies. By lunchtime, Sarah had witnessed enough of Peterson's behavior to fill several pages of mental notes. But what struck her even more was how his toxic attitude seemed to spread like a virus throughout the office. It wasn't just Peterson. Other managers, eager to impress him, had begun treating the support staff with the same cruelty, as though belittling those beneath them was a required part of their position. Sarah had seen the way the other employees had quietly absorbed the mistreatment. It was as if they were afraid to speak up, afraid to risk their own standing within the company. It was clear that this wasn't just a problem with one man, it was a pervasive issue. During her lunch break, Sarah sat in the small, stark break room in the basement, a room that stood in sharp contrast to the luxury of the executive floors. The furniture was cheap, just a few plastic chairs, a wobbly table, and an ancient microwave that looked older than most of the employees. As she ate, she spoke with Maria, an older cleaning lady who had worked at Meridian for 12 years. Maria offered Sarah some homemade tamales, a small gesture of kindness amidst the hostility of the corporate world. "Don't take it personally," Maria said, her voice low as she shared her meal with Sarah. "Mr. Peterson treats everyone like this. Last month, he made Jenny cry because she accidentally vacuumed while he was on a phone call. He went off on her for no reason." Jenny, a young Asian woman, nodded solemnly. "I needed this job to help pay for my college classes," she said quietly. "But sometimes I think about quitting. It's not just the cleaning work that's hard, it's the way they make us feel like we're nothing. As Sarah listened to their stories, a sense of determination grew stronger inside her. The problems at Meridian Technologies went far deeper than one racist executive. The entire system, the culture that had been allowed to flourish, needed to be torn down and rebuilt. It was a deep-seated issue that couldn't be solved with a few small changes. Sarah was committed to making sure the transformation went to the very core of the company. After lunch, Sarah returned to the executive floors, feeling more resolved than ever. She was cleaning near the HR department when she overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. "We need to hire a new marketing assistant," one woman said. "There's this really qualified candidate, but Peterson says she won't fit our company image. You know what that means, right?" "Yeah," another voice replied. "Same thing that happened with that programmer last month. Shame he had amazing references." Sarah peered around the corner and saw two HR employees, their faces set in frustration but tinged with resignation. They knew what was happening was wrong, but they felt powerless to change it. The system was stacked against them and they had no way to fight back. As Sarah continued her rounds, she witnessed another troubling scene. Peterson walked past the break room where a group of maintenance workers were having coffee. "Look at them," he said loudly, gesturing to the workers. "Just sitting around. This is why nothing gets done around here. No work ethic. These people." The maintenance workers scattered, leaving their break unfinished, trying to avoid Peterson's wrath. Sarah noticed how they kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact, doing whatever they could to remain invisible. It was a survival technique she recognized from her own early days of cleaning offices to pay for college. Later in the afternoon, Sarah was cleaning the bathrooms when she overheard sobbing coming from one of the stalls. She recognized Amanda Torres, the head of marketing, talking on the phone. "I can't take it anymore, Mom," Amanda said between sobs. "Peterson blocked another one of my proposals today. He said my background makes me too sympathetic to diversity initiatives. I've worked so hard to get here, but they never let me forget I'm different." It was a sobering moment for Sarah. Even the executives weren't safe from Peterson's discrimination if they didn't fit his narrow, racist view of who deserved to be in power. Sarah felt a pang of empathy for Amanda, but she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about cleaning or about making a point to Peterson. It was about dismantling the systemic injustice that had taken root in the company. As the day went on, Sarah noticed small acts of rebellion. A security guard who secretly let cleaning staff use the executive elevator when Peterson wasn't around, a janitor who quietly passed along a note of encouragement. The seeds of change were. The small acts of defiance that had sprung up throughout Meridian Technologies were becoming more frequent, though they were often quiet and unspoken. Junior employees would warn the maintenance team whenever Peterson was on his way, and Mrs. Rodriguez, the cleaning supervisor, kept extra cleaning supplies hidden in various parts of the building so that her staff wouldn't have to face Peterson when they needed something. These small gestures of rebellion were a survival mechanism for those who were caught in the toxic culture that had seeped through the entire company. The truth was that the system was designed to keep people in their places, and the employees had learned how to navigate it quietly, with as much grace as they could muster. By the end of her first day, Sarah had a complete picture of the culture at Meridian Technologies. It wasn't just about one bad boss, James Peterson. It was about a broken system that allowed discrimination to thrive unchecked. It was about good people staying silent, afraid to speak out for fear of retribution. It was about talented workers being held back, not because of their abilities or potential, but because of their race, background, or social status. The sense of injustice was suffocating, and it weighed heavily on Sarah's shoulders. But she wasn't someone who could sit idly by and accept things as they were. That evening, as she changed out of her gray cleaning uniform in the basement bathroom, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. She took a deep breath, letting the weight of the day settle on her, but she didn't allow herself to sink into despair. Instead, a quiet resolve built up inside her. In just a few short days she would be sitting in the CEO's office, facing the people who had perpetuated the toxic culture she had just witnessed. But now, she knew her job wasn't just about improving profits or efficiency, it was about fixing a broken culture, giving a voice to those who had been silenced for far too long. She whispered to herself, time for real change, her voice steady, her determination stronger than ever. The next morning, as Sarah arrived early to begin her shift, the building was still quiet. She pushed her cleaning cart through the empty halls, but today felt different. There was an important board meeting scheduled, one where she was supposed to be introduced as the new CEO. Of course, nobody except Mrs. Rodriguez knew that the woman in the gray cleaning uniform was the same person the executives were anxiously awaiting. The irony of it all wasn't lost on Sarah. While the management team anticipated her arrival as the new leader of the company, they had no idea they were already interacting with her, unaware of the transformation about to take place. At 9 a.m., Peterson called an emergency meeting in the main conference room, summoning all department heads and senior managers. Sarah watched as they filed into the room, laptops and coffee cups in hand, their conversations murmuring quietly as they passed her. She continued to pretend to clean the windows outside the room, as though she were just another part of the building's background. But every so often, her eyes would flicker toward the door, noting the different body language of the executives as they entered the meeting. There was a certain air of anticipation in the room, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder how they would react once they learned the truth. Once everyone had gathered, Peterson stood at the front of the room, his voice booming as he began his tirade. "Since our new CEO is starting next week," Peterson said loudly, "we need to make sure everything is perfect. We can't have anything embarrassing happen on her first day." He made sure to emphasize the word embarrassing, his tone dripping with derision. But his words faltered when he stopped mid-sentence, noticing Sarah cleaning the windows just outside the conference room. "What are you doing here?" Peterson demanded, his voice sharp with annoyance. "Can't you see we're having an important meeting?" His eyes narrowed as he marched toward the glass door. "What do you think you're doing?" he added, his voice growing louder. "Go clean somewhere else." The room fell into a heavy silence. All around Sarah, 20 pairs of eyes watched the confrontation unfold. Some looked embarrassed by the spectacle, while others looked away, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. No one spoke up. No one challenged Peterson. Sarah, however, kept cleaning, her face neutral as she refused to be intimidated. "I was told to clean all the conference rooms before 10 a.m., Sarah said quietly, her voice calm but firm. Peterson's face turned red with anger. "Well, I'm telling you to leave now," he snapped. "Or do I need to speak slower for you to understand?" He turned to the room of executives, a smug grin spreading across his face. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier," he said loudly as if trying to make a point for all to hear. "These people just don't understand how business works." Michael Chin, the company's CFO, cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "James, maybe we should just let her finish," he suggested, trying to ease the tension in the room. But Peterson wasn't having it. "No, Mike," he cut him off. "This is a perfect teaching moment. Watch and learn how to maintain standards." He turned back to Sarah, his eyes hardening as he prepared to school her in front of everyone. "Let me explain something to you," he continued. "Do you see these people in this room?" He waved his hand toward the executives. "They're executives. They make important decisions. They run this company. They're educated. Do you understand what educated means?" As Peterson's words dripped with condescension, Sarah noticed Amanda Torres, the head of marketing, looking sick to her stomach. A few others in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but still no one spoke up to defend Sarah. The power dynamics at play were too entrenched for anyone to dare challenge Peterson openly. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. She kept her eyes locked on Peterson's, and for the first time she spoke to him with quiet confidence. "Chief Executive Officer," she said clearly, emphasizing each word. "I know what CO means." Peterson blinked, momentarily surprised but quickly recovered. "Oh, so you can read, huh?" he sneered. "Did you learn that from cleaning the door signs?" He turned to the room again, laughing loudly, trying to paint Sarah's knowledge as something trivial, beneath the serious business they were discussing. "See, give them a little education and they think they know everything." Just as the tension in the room seemed to reach its peak, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Peterson, sir," she said nervously, "the board chairman just arrived. He's asking about the new CEO." Peterson's face changed instantly, his demeanor shifting from arrogant bully to nervous executive. "But she's not supposed to be here until—" he began but quickly caught himself. Straightening his tie, he cleared his throat and regained his composure. "Tell him we're preparing for the meeting," he said, his voice much softer now. Then he pointed at Sarah. "Get her out of here. I don't want the chairman seeing this kind of unprofessional behavior." Sarah picked up her cleaning supplies slowly, her gaze never leaving Peterson. As he scrambled to straighten papers and organize the room, trying to present an air of professionalism, Sarah couldn't help but smile to herself. She had just seen Peterson at his most vulnerable, mocking his new boss in front of the very executives he was trying to impress. And now he was scrambling to protect his image, oblivious to the fact that the person he had just belittled was about to change everything. As Sarah walked out of the room with her cleaning cart, she overheard Peterson continuing to speak, his voice still booming. "Someone make sure all these cleaning people stay out of sight when Miss Mitchell arrives," he said, as though Sarah hadn't just been standing in front of him moments earlier. "We don't want her first impression of our company to be, well, you know." Sarah smiled to herself. In just 30 minutes she would walk back into that same conference room, but not as a cleaner. This time she would walk in as Sarah Mitchell, the new CEO of Meridian Technologies. And James Peterson was about to learn the most important lesson of his career. As she made her way to the basement locker room, Sarah changed out of her gray cleaning uniform for the last time. She put on a navy blue designer suit, her pearl earrings, and the gold watch her father had given her when she graduated from Harvard. Looking at herself in the mirror, she smiled at the transformation. Gone was the quiet cleaning lady who had been mocked by the likes of Peterson. In her place stood Sarah Mitchell, the new CEO of Meridian Technologies. Mrs. Rodriguez helped her with her hair, carefully taking it out of the tight bun and styling it professionally. "I wish," Mrs. Rodriguez started, but her words trailed off, her voice filled with admiration for the change she had witnessed. Mrs. Rodriguez's words echoed in Sarah's mind as she prepared to step into the boardroom. "I could see their faces," she had said, her voice thick with emotion. "Try not to cry, especially Mr. Peterson. He has no idea what's coming." Sarah gave a small nod, her resolve hardening as she looked at Mrs. Rodriguez and the other cleaning staff, who had gathered together in the basement, away from the chaos of the boardroom. "Make sure all the cleaning staff watches the live stream of the board meeting on their phones," Sarah had whispered. "I want everyone to see this moment. It's not just for me, it's for all of you." The magnitude of what was about to happen was not lost on her. This was bigger than one person. This was about the entire system, the way people like Peterson had turned their position into a weapon to degrade others. Today, everything was going to change. Upstairs, the boardroom was buzzing with nervous energy. The chairman, Mr. William Roberts, sat at the head of the table, his eyes glancing down at his watch every few minutes, a sign of his impatience. He had been told the new CEO would arrive any minute, but still there was no sign of her. Peterson paced around the room, adjusting the seats, fixing the papers, trying to make everything look perfect for the cameras and the executives. "Where is she?" Peterson muttered anxiously, his voice laced with frustration. "The new CEO should have been here by now. This is not a good first impression." He was sweating now, the pressure mounting. The room was packed, with every executive and board member present, and even some middle managers were standing along the walls, eager to see the new leader who would take charge of Meridian Technologies. The tension in the room was palpable. But one thing was missing, the very person they had all gathered to meet. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah's heels clicked loudly on the marble floor as she walked toward the boardroom, the sound unmistakable in the stillness of the hallway. Through the glass walls, she could see Peterson's back as he stood at the front of the room, still giving last-minute instructions to the executives. "Remember," he was saying, "we need to show M. Mitchell that we run a tight ship here. No mistakes, no surprises." His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, betraying his underlying anxiety. He wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. Sarah opened the door to the boardroom, and the room fell silent immediately. Peterson, who had been so confident just moments before, turned around with a big fake smile plastered on his face, ready to greet the new CEO. But when his eyes locked on Sarah, his smile faltered, his face going white as a sheet. The transformation was immediate, and for a brief moment, Peterson looked like a man who had just been caught in an unforgivable lie. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, your new CEO." She stood tall, unflinching as the realization hit everyone in the room. Peterson's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out, his expression frozen in disbelief. Some of the other executives began whispering among themselves, their eyes flicking between Sarah and Peterson in growing confusion. But, Peterson stammered, unable to form coherent words. You were the cleaning lady?" He couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The woman who had been cleaning the windows just days ago was now standing in front of him as the CEO, the very person he had ridiculed and belittled. Sarah smiled, her gaze steady. "Yes, Mr. Peterson," she said, finishing his sentence for him. "For the past 2 days, I've been working as a member of our cleaning staff." She walked to the head of the table where the chairman, Mr. Roberts, was sitting. With a smile, Sarah turned to face the room again. "It's a technique I've used at every company I've led. You learn a lot about a company's true culture when people think you're invisible." The color drained from Peterson's face as his mind raced back to all the cruel comments he had made to her just days before. He remembered mocking her intelligence, calling her names, and belittling her job as if it were beneath him. Now, those words hung heavy in the air, and Sarah was reminding everyone of the reality he had tried to hide. "Please everyone take your seats," Sarah said with authority. As the room began to settle, she opened her laptop. On the screen behind her, security camera footage started to play. The video showed clips from the past 2 days, including Peterson's discriminatory comments, the mistreatment of staff, and the silent witnesses who had watched it all unfold without speaking up. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah said calmly, her tone cutting through the tension in the room, "would you like to explain to the board why you think someone's ability to clean windows reflects their intelligence or education level?" The question was simple, but the implication was powerful. Peterson's face turned an even deeper shade of red, and he slumped into his chair, loosening his tie in an attempt to cool off. He had nowhere to hide. I didn't mean it that way," Peterson stammered. "I was just trying to maintain standards. Standards, you know." His voice trailed off as he struggled to explain himself. Sarah raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Let's talk about standards," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "Let's talk about how you treat people you think are beneath you. Let's talk about the qualified candidates you've rejected because they didn't fit your idea of what this company should look like." She paused, looking around the room, her gaze sharp. "And let's talk about all of you." The room went deathly silent. How many of you saw what was happening and said nothing? How many of you laughed along because it was easier than standing up for what's right? The weight of her words hit hard. The silence was deafening as Sarah's gaze swept across the room, taking in the uncomfortable faces of the executives. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, Sarah could see members of the cleaning staff gathered in the hallway, watching the live stream of the meeting on their phones. Some of them had tears in their eyes. This was their moment too, the moment when everything changed. "Today marks the beginning of a new era at Meridian Technologies," Sarah announced, her voice clear and full of conviction. "An era where every employee, regardless of their position, will be treated with respect and dignity. An era where talent and hard work matter more than prejudice and privilege." She turned her gaze to Peterson, who looked like he was shrinking in his chair. "And Mr. Peterson, I believe you and I have a lot to discuss about your future at this company." After the shocking revelation in the boardroom, Sarah called for a 15-minute break. The executives rushed out of the room, whispering among themselves, while Peterson remained frozen in his chair, staring blankly ahead. His mind was racing, but there was no escape from the reality that had just been thrust upon him. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah said quietly, walking toward him with a calm authority, "please wait in my office." The new CEO's office was large and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Peterson sat in one of the guest chairs, sweat dripping down his face as he tugged at his collar. He was no longer the powerful executive he had once been. Now he was just a man trapped by his own actions. Sarah didn't make him wait long. She walked in with Mrs. Rodriguez and Jenny, the young cleaning staff member who Peterson had made cry just a month ago. The sight of Jenny standing beside Sarah, her back straight and proud, made Peterson feel smaller than ever before. "Many people expect me to fire you right now, Mr. Peterson," Sarah began, sitting behind her desk. "They think that would be fair punishment for your behavior. What do you think?" She leaned forward, watching him closely. Peterson's voice trembled as he tried to explain. "Miss Mitchell, I can explain. I was just trying to maintain professional standards. I didn't mean any harm." Jenny spoke up, her voice full of raw emotion. "You made me feel worthless. You called me stupid because I'm a cleaner, even though I'm working to pay for my engineering degree." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her eyes hard but full of years of quiet strength. "For years we've watched you hurt people, good people, hardworking people. You judged us by our uniforms, not our hearts or minds." Peterson looked down at his expensive shoes, his world unraveling before him. For the first time in his life he felt powerless. There were no excuses left, no way to bully his way out of this. Sarah opened a folder on her desk and looked at him calmly. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm not going to fire you." Everyone in the room looked surprised, especially Peterson. Instead, Sarah continued. "Starting tomorrow you will spend 3 months working alongside our cleaning staff. Same uniform. Same hours. Same duties. You'll learn every person's name, their stories, their dreams. You'll understand what it means to be treated as invisible." Peterson's jaw dropped. But I'm the VP of operations. I have important responsibilities." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "Your most important responsibility right now is to learn respect." "Better human being," Sarah replied firmly, her voice unwavering as she stood tall in front of Peterson. Your salary will be reduced to match the cleaning staff's wages during these 3 months. The difference will go into a new education fund for our support staff, she said, handing him a document. This is your choice, Mr. Peterson. Sign this agreement and begin your learning journey tomorrow, or submit your resignation now. Peterson's hands trembled as he looked down at the paper. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. Around the city, many companies knew his name, and the thought of being seen in a cleaning uniform, doing the work he had mocked for so long, was almost unbearable. His pride was on the line. Yet, as he read the document and processed what was at stake, one thought stood out above all else. Losing his job was even worse. Slowly, with hesitation, he picked up the pen and signed the agreement, the words of his new reality now in black and white. Sarah nodded approvingly as he finished. Report to Mrs. Rodriguez at 6:30 a.m. tomorrow, she said, her voice still calm but firm. And Mr. Peterson, the security cameras will be watching. One disrespectful word or action, and you'll be immediately terminated. Peterson left the office looking defeated. His shoulders were slumped, and he walked with the slow, hesitant gait of someone who had just had the foundation of their entire identity shaken. Once the door closed behind him, Sarah turned to Mrs. Rodriguez and Jenny, the two women who had witnessed Peterson's cruelty firsthand. Now let's talk about your futures, Sarah said, her tone shifting to one of encouragement. She looked at Jenny, who still seemed to be processing the events that had just transpired. Jenny, I understand you're studying engineering. Jenny nodded, her eyes wide with disbelief, still trying to come to terms with everything that had just happened. Starting next week, Sarah continued, you'll work part-time in our engineering department as an intern. Same salary as your cleaning job, but with flexible hours to accommodate your classes. Sarah could see the emotion in Jenny's eyes as she spoke, and she smiled. Jenny's voice wavered with gratitude. Thank you, Miss Mitchell, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah could see the tears forming in Jenny's eyes, but they were tears of hope, not fear. Sarah turned to Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm creating a new position for you, Director of Support Services. You'll oversee all cleaning, maintenance, and facility staff. Full benefits, executive salary, and a seat at the management table. She smiled at the woman who had been with the company for years, quietly witnessing the mistreatment of her colleagues. No one knows this company's heart better than you. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Instead, she rushed forward and embraced Sarah, crying happy tears. It was the kind of moment that transcended the usual confines of business. It was a genuine acknowledgement of years of unseen sacrifice. Sarah hugged her back, knowing this was a pivotal moment for both of them. Later that afternoon, Sarah called an all-staff meeting in the company's largest conference room. Everyone, executives, middle managers, support staff, was there, including Peterson, who stood in the back of the room looking distinctly uncomfortable. His posture was stiff, his face red with embarrassment, and he looked like a man who had been caught in an act he could never undo. Today marks the beginning of real change, Sarah announced, her voice clear and strong. We're creating a workplace where every job is respected, where every voice matters, and where success is built on character, not prejudice. She scanned the room, making eye contact with several staff members. Tomorrow we start fresh. Some of us will learn hard lessons. Her gaze flicked toward Peterson for a moment. While others will finally get the opportunities they deserve. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. But all of us will work together to make Meridian Technologies a company we can all be proud of. The room erupted into applause, the loudest cheers coming from the cleaning staff, who were standing along the walls. They were no longer invisible. They were finally being seen. 1 month had passed since Sarah's dramatic revelation in the boardroom, and the changes at Meridian Technologies were visible everywhere. But nowhere were the changes more apparent than in the early morning cleaning shifts. James Peterson, once a proud VP of operations, was now dressed in a gray cleaning uniform. He was mopping the lobby floor at 6:45 a.m., his designer suits now hanging untouched in his closet at home. His expensive watch had been replaced by a simple digital one that could withstand cleaning chemicals, and his hands, once soft from office work, now had calluses from real labor. The transformation was striking, but it was one Peterson had begun to understand. James, you missed a spot, Maria called out kindly. She was the same woman he used to ignore, the one who had always been invisible to him, but now she was teaching him the correct way to clean marble floors. Peterson nodded, quietly acknowledging the mistake, and went back to fix it without a word of complaint. The past month had changed him in ways he never expected. He learned that Jenny, the young cleaner he had once mocked, was actually a genius at mathematics. She helped him understand the precise measurements of cleaning solutions while sharing her dreams of becoming an engineer. Peterson listened, fascinated by her intelligence, which had been hidden behind the uniform he had once thought defined a person's worth. He discovered that Thomas, the old janitor, had once been a professor in his home country. Every morning, Thomas would stop Peterson while they cleaned the bathrooms, teaching him lessons on history and philosophy. Peterson began to look forward to these lessons, realizing how much wisdom he had ignored because of his own prejudices. One morning, as Sarah entered the lobby, she greeted the staff with a warm smile. She had made it a habit to arrive early and personally check in with the cleaning staff. As she approached Peterson, she noticed him quickly straighten up, his face red with embarrassment. "Mr. Peterson," Sarah called him over. "How are you finding your new responsibilities?" Peterson glanced down at his cleaning cart, then back up at Sarah. "I've learned more in the past month than in 20 years as VP," he admitted quietly, his voice almost apologetic. "I never knew how hard this work was. I never knew the stories of these people. I mean my colleagues." He paused, correcting himself. "Sorry, my friends." Sarah smiled, her gaze softening as she nodded. "And how's the wage adjustment going?" Peterson's face showed real understanding. "It's been eye-opening. My family had to cancel our country club membership. We're cooking at home now instead of eating out. I had no idea how people survived on these wages." His voice had the faintest tremor, the result of a realization that had shaken him to his core. Just then Mrs. Rodriguez, now Director of Support Services, walked into the lobby wearing a professional suit. She was heading to the morning management meeting where she would present her plan for improving working conditions across all support departments. "James," she called out, "don't forget we need extra cleaning in the break rooms today. The new employee appreciation program starts at lunch." "Yes, ma'am," Peterson replied respectfully, his voice steady. A few months ago this exchange would have been unimaginable, but now it felt natural, an acknowledgement of the growth Peterson had experienced. Throughout the morning the changes in company culture were clear. Executives greeted the cleaning staff by name, and the break rooms had become shared spaces where everyone ate together. The old executive-only signs had disappeared. In the engineering department, Jenny was thriving in her new internship. Her supervisor had already marked her as a future star of the company. In the HR office, new policies ensured that hiring decisions were based on talent and potential, not prejudice. During lunch break, Peterson sat in the basement break room with his fellow cleaning staff. He was sharing his sandwich with Maria while Thomas told stories of philosophy and history. It was a world away from the corporate boardrooms and executive lunches he had once inhabited, but it was the world that had taught him more than he had ever learned in his high-rise offices. Peterson smiled for the first time in a long while, feeling truly content in the place he had once thought was beneath. "What's funny," Peterson said suddenly, his voice carrying an air of reflection. "A month ago, I thought working here would be the worst punishment possible. Now I understand it wasn't a punishment at all, it was an education." Sarah, who had been walking past, stopped to listen. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the tone of his words. Peterson continued, his voice softening as he spoke about the transformation he had experienced. "These people, my friends," he said, gesturing to the cleaning staff around him, "they taught me more about dignity, hard work, and respect than any business school ever could. I was the ignorant one, not them." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if the whole room paused to reflect. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the man before her had changed in ways that she had hoped for but never fully anticipated. The transformation in Peterson had become a symbol of the shift that had taken place at Meridian Technologies, and it was a change that was still unfolding in profound ways. Later that afternoon, Sarah called Peterson to her office. He arrived still in his cleaning uniform, the faint smell of disinfectant clinging to his clothes. There was a certain humbleness about him now, an almost unrecognizable man from the arrogant executive who had once scoffed at the very idea of working alongside the cleaning staff. "I've been watching you, James," Sarah began, her voice steady and approving. "Your supervisors tell me you've shown real change. No complaints, no attitude, just honest work and genuine effort to learn." Peterson nodded, his eyes focused on the floor. He shifted his feet uncomfortably, looking down at his worn cleaning shoes, his posture reflective of the weight of his journey. "Your 3-month assignment was meant to teach you humility and respect," Sarah continued, her gaze firm yet kind. "What do you think you've learned?" Peterson thought for a moment, his mind swirling with the countless lessons he had absorbed over the past month. The experience had been transformative, but the exact words to articulate his growth still eluded him. Slowly he spoke. I learned that respect isn't about power or position, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. It's about recognizing the dignity in every person, understanding their struggles and valuing their contributions. I learned that I was wrong, completely wrong. Sarah smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief. That's exactly what I hoped you would learn, she replied, her voice filled with warmth. Now, how would you like to help me make sure no one else makes the same mistakes you did? Peterson looked up at her, his expression surprised but thoughtful. He hadn't expected that kind of invitation, but now that it was before him, it felt like the next natural step in his journey of redemption. A new chapter was about to begin, not just for him but for the entire company. 6 months had passed since Sarah Mitchell's unforgettable first day as CEO, and the changes at Meridian Technologies were nothing short of remarkable. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the building as Sarah walked inside, smiling at the transformation she saw around her. The lobby, once a quiet, sterile space where the divide between employees of different levels was palpable, now buzzed with activity. Employees from all levels, from executives to support staff, chatted together near the coffee station, which was now free for everyone, not just reserved for the upper management. The old divisions between important and unimportant staff had completely disappeared. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she observed this tangible shift in culture. Today was a special day. Meridian was hosting its first Unity in Business conference, and companies from across the country had gathered to learn about the company's incredible transformation. As Sarah walked into the main conference hall, she took in the sight of the hundreds of business leaders seated, waiting to hear the story of what had happened at Meridian. On stage sat an unusual panel. Mrs. Rodriguez, now confidently wearing an executive suit as Director of Support Services, Jenny, who had just been promoted to junior engineer while still finishing her degree, and perhaps most surprisingly James Peterson, now dressed in a simple business suit rather than the flashy designer clothes he had once favored. Sarah stepped up to the podium, ready to share the story of the company's profound transformation. 6 months ago, I walked into this building wearing a cleaning uniform, Sarah began, her voice strong and clear. What I saw then was a company divided by prejudice and fear. What I see today is a family united by respect and understanding. The audience listened intently, hanging on to every word. Some were taking notes, others nodding in agreement as Sarah shared the journey they had been on. She spoke about the difficult but necessary changes, and how they had led to a healthier, more unified company. Then she shared the company's incredible results. Employee satisfaction had doubled, productivity had increased by 40%, and turnover had dropped to nearly zero. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Sarah continued. Mr. Peterson, would you like to share your experience? Peterson stood up, walking to the podium, his steps steady and deliberate. Gone was the arrogant executive who had mocked a cleaner months ago. In his place stood a humbled man, who had learned the true meaning of leadership and respect. As he began to speak, his voice was filled with sincerity and honesty. 6 months ago I was the problem, Peterson began, his words simple but profound. I judged people by their uniforms, not their character. I confused power with worth. My 3 months working as a cleaner taught me more about leadership than my 20 years as an executive. He paused for a moment, looking at his former cleaning colleagues in the audience. These incredible people taught me about dignity, hard work, and real strength. Peterson's words resonated with the audience, and as he finished he added, now in my new role as head of employee relations, I make sure no one ever feels invisible or unworthy in our company. Jenny spoke next, sharing her own story of how she had gone from crying in the bathroom after Peterson's mockery to leading engineering projects. Her voice was filled with pride, and the audience could feel the power of her words. Mrs. Rodriguez followed, describing the changes in company policy that had led to equal pay initiatives, education support, and promotion opportunities for all staff. But the most touching moment came when Thomas, the elderly janitor and former professor, took the stage. He announced the success of the new education program, which had helped 15 employees earn degrees while working at the company. The audience broke into applause when he revealed that he was now teaching business ethics courses to all new managers at Meridian. Sarah returned to the podium for the final words. Our company's transformation wasn't just about punishing bad behavior, she explained. It was about creating understanding through experience. Every executive now spends 1 week each year working in support roles. A cleaner in the hallways, a server in the cafeteria, or someone maintaining the building. They learn to see the value in every job and every person. The results were clear. Meridian Technologies had become a model for corporate culture change. Their stock price had risen as customers and investors appreciated their ethical leadership. Other companies were now calling daily, asking how they could create similar transformations within their own organizations. After the conference, Sarah walked through the building, observing the changes she had helped create. In the break room, she saw executives and cleaning staff sharing lunch and laughing together. In the hallways, people greeted each other by name, regardless of their position. Sarah stopped by Peterson's office, a smaller, more modest space than his old one. He was helping a young cleaner fill out college application forms, something that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. "Miss Mitchell," Peterson called as she passed. "Thank you. Not for punishing me but for showing me a better way to be a leader and a human being." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you for being willing to learn and change." As she walked to her office, Sarah thought about her father's words. The real heart of any company beats on the ground floor. She had proven him right by revealing the truth from the bottom up. She hadn't just changed a company, she had changed lives. And somewhere in the building, a cleaning cart rolled quietly along, pushed by hands that were now respected, valued, and seen. "What's funny," Peterson said suddenly, his voice carrying an air of reflection. "A month ago, I thought working here would be the worst punishment possible. Now I understand it wasn't a punishment at all, it was an education." Sarah, who had been walking past, stopped to listen. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the tone of his words. Peterson continued, his voice softening as he spoke about the transformation he had experienced. "These people, my friends," he said, gesturing to the cleaning staff around him, "they taught me more about dignity, hard work, and respect than any business school ever could. I was the ignorant one, not them." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if the whole room paused to reflect. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the man before her had changed in ways that she had hoped for but never fully anticipated. The transformation in Peterson had become a symbol of the shift that had taken place at Meridian Technologies, and it was a change that was still unfolding in profound ways. Later that afternoon, Sarah called Peterson to her office. He arrived still in his cleaning uniform, the faint smell of disinfectant clinging to his clothes. There was a certain humbleness about him now, an almost unrecognizable man from the arrogant executive who had once scoffed at the very idea of working alongside the cleaning staff. "I've been watching you, James," Sarah began, her voice steady and approving. "Your supervisors tell me you've shown real change. No complaints, no attitude, just honest work and genuine effort to learn." Peterson nodded, his eyes focused on the floor. He shifted his feet uncomfortably, looking down at his worn cleaning shoes, his posture reflective of the weight of his journey. "Your 3-month assignment was meant to teach you humility and respect," Sarah continued, her gaze firm yet kind. "What do you think you've learned?" Peterson thought for a moment, his mind swirling with the countless lessons he had absorbed over the past month. The experience had been transformative, but the exact words to articulate his growth still eluded him. Slowly he spoke. "I learned that respect isn't about power or position," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "It's about recognizing the dignity in every person, understanding their struggles and valuing their contributions. I learned that I was wrong, completely wrong." Sarah smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief. "That's exactly what I hoped you would learn," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "Now, how would you like to help me make sure no one else makes the same mistakes you did?" Peterson looked up at her, his expression surprised but thoughtful. He hadn't expected that kind of invitation, but now that it was before him, it felt like the next natural step in his journey of redemption. A new chapter was about to begin, not just for him but for the entire company. 6 months had passed since Sarah Mitchell's unforgettable first day as CEO, and the changes at Meridian Technologies were nothing short of remarkable. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the building as Sarah walked inside, smiling at the transformation she saw around her. The lobby, once a quiet, sterile space where the divide between employees of different levels was palpable, now buzzed with activity. Employees from all levels, from executives to support staff, chatted together near the coffee station, which was now free for everyone, not just reserved for the upper management. The old divisions between important and unimportant staff had completely disappeared. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she observed this tangible shift in culture. Today was a special day. Meridian was hosting its first Unity in Business conference, and companies from across the country had gathered to learn about the company's incredible transformation. As Sarah walked into the main conference hall, she took in the sight of the hundreds of business leaders seated, waiting to hear the story of what had happened at Meridian. On stage sat an unusual panel. Mrs. Rodriguez, now confidently wearing an executive suit as Director of Support Services, Jenny, who had just been promoted to junior engineer while still finishing her degree, and perhaps most surprisingly James Peterson, now dressed in a simple business suit rather than the flashy designer clothes he had once favored. Sarah stepped up to the podium, ready to share the story of the company's profound transformation. 6 months ago, I walked into this building wearing a cleaning uniform, Sarah began, her voice strong and clear. What I saw then was a company divided by prejudice and fear. What I see today is a family united by respect and understanding. The audience listened intently, hanging on to every word. Some were taking notes, others nodding in agreement as Sarah shared the journey they had been on. She spoke about the difficult but necessary changes, and how they had led to a healthier, more unified company. Then she shared the company's incredible results. Employee satisfaction had doubled, productivity had increased by 40%, and turnover had dropped to nearly zero. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Sarah continued. Mr. Peterson, would you like to share your experience? Peterson stood up, walking to the podium, his steps steady and deliberate. Gone was the arrogant executive who had mocked a cleaner months ago. In his place stood a humbled man, who had learned the true meaning of leadership and respect. As he began to speak, his voice was filled with sincerity and honesty. 6 months ago I was the problem, Peterson began, his words simple but profound. I judged people by their uniforms, not their character. I confused power with worth. My 3 months working as a cleaner taught me more about leadership than my 20 years as an executive. He paused for a moment, looking at his former cleaning colleagues in the audience. These incredible people taught me about dignity, hard work, and real strength. Peterson's words resonated with the audience, and as he finished he added, now in my new role as head of employee relations, I make sure no one ever feels invisible or unworthy in our company. Jenny spoke next, sharing her own story of how she had gone from crying in the bathroom after Peterson's mockery to leading engineering projects. Her voice was filled with pride, and the audience could feel the power of her words. Mrs. Rodriguez followed, describing the changes in company policy that had led to equal pay initiatives, education support, and promotion opportunities for all staff. But the most touching moment came when Thomas, the elderly janitor and former professor, took the stage. He announced the success of the new education program, which had helped 15 employees earn degrees while working at the company. The audience broke into applause when he revealed that he was now teaching business ethics courses to all new managers at Meridian. Sarah returned to the podium for the final words. Our company's transformation wasn't just about punishing bad behavior, she explained. It was about creating understanding through experience. Every executive now spends 1 week each year working in support roles. A cleaner in the hallways, a server in the cafeteria, or someone maintaining the building. They learn to see the value in every job and every person. The results were clear. Meridian Technologies had become a model for corporate culture change. Their stock price had risen as customers and investors appreciated their ethical leadership. Other companies were now calling daily, asking how they could create similar transformations within their own organizations. After the conference, Sarah walked through the building, observing the changes she had helped create. In the break room, she saw executives and cleaning staff sharing lunch and laughing together. In the hallways, people greeted each other by name, regardless of their position. Sarah stopped by Peterson's office, a smaller, more modest space than his old one. He was helping a young cleaner fill out college application forms, something that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. Miss Mitchell, Peterson called as she passed. Thank you. Not for punishing me but for showing me a better way to be a leader and a human being. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Thank you for being willing to learn and change. As she walked to her office, Sarah thought about her father's words. The real heart of any company beats on the ground floor. She had proven him right by revealing the truth from the bottom up. She hadn't just changed a company, she had changed lives. And somewhere in the building, a cleaning cart rolled quietly along, pushed by hands that were now respected, valued, and seen.